Here is what just happened, and I need you to understand the gravity of this moment because what we are witnessing right now is nothing short of a complete reshaping of North American trade dynamics. Canada just doubled down on its China deal. I am not talking about some minor trade adjustment or a symbolic gesture. I am talking about Prime Minister Mark Carney's government looking directly at Donald Trump's threats, at his bluster about 100% tariffs, and saying, "We are doing this anyway." Let me walk you through exactly what went down because the details here matter. They matter enormously for the future of our economy and our standing in the world. In January, Mark Carney went to Beijing, not Washington. And while he was there, Canada and China finalized a comprehensive trade agreement that fundamentally alters the economic landscape of this continent. China agreed to reduce tariffs on Canadian agricultural products. We are talking about canola, lobsters, and peas, real products from real Canadian farmers and fishermen who have been getting squeezed for years by shifting global demand and protectionist policies elsewhere. But here is the part that has Washington absolutely losing its mind. Canada dropped its tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% down to a mere 6%. Furthermore, they are allowing up to 49,000 Chinese-made EVs into Canada annually. Now, Trump had warned Canada. He had stood up in January and threatened a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if this deal went through. He literally said Canada would become a drop-off port for Chinese products aimed at the American market. These are the usual fear-mongering and bullying tactics that have defined U.S.-Canada relations for far too long, and Carney decided to call the bluff. To understand why this is so much bigger than just trade numbers on a spreadsheet, we have to look at the historical context. For decades, Canada has been economically tethered to the United States in a way that has been, let us be honest, suffocating. Roughly 75% of Canadian exports have traditionally gone south of the border. That kind of dependence gives the United States enormous leverage. Successive American administrations have used that leverage, sometimes subtly and sometimes not so subtly, to ensure Canadian policy remains aligned with Washington's interests. Trump's tariff threats were not new. They were just louder, cruder versions of pressure that has always been there under the surface of the special relationship. But what Carney is doing, what this China deal represents, is Canada finally saying, enough is enough. The goal his administration has set is to dramatically increase non-U.S. exports by 2035. They are not talking about minor adjustments or moving the needle a few percentage points. They are talking about fundamentally diversifying Canada's economic partnerships so that no single country, especially not the United States, can hold Canada's economy hostage or dictate our domestic policy through economic coercion. The timing of this could not be more perfect because right now, as we speak, American pressure tactics are backfiring in spectacular fashion. Trump thought his 100% tariff threat would make Canada back down and cancel the Beijing trip. Instead, it accelerated Canada's pivot to China. It proved to Canadians exactly why they need to diversify their trade portfolio. It made the case for Carney's strategy better than any political speech or white paper ever could. Let us talk about who benefits from this deal right now, today. This is not some abstract future scenario that will play out over decades. Real Canadian industries are already seeing real results. In the beef industry, China reopened its market to Canadian beef after a ban that had been in place since 2021. Do you understand what that means for Canadian ranchers and processors from Alberta to Ontario? We are talking about access to one of the world's largest and fastest growing markets for high-quality protein. This means jobs, revenue, and economic stability for rural communities that have been struggling under the weight of market uncertainty. Canadian farmers growing canola, raising lobsters in the Maritimes, and producing peas in the prairies now have reduced tariffs for getting into the Chinese market. These are not symbolic gestures. These are concrete economic benefits that translate directly into better livelihoods for Canadian agricultural workers and their families. Then there is the electric vehicle piece, which is perhaps the most forward-looking part of the entire agreement. By allowing Chinese EVs into Canada at dramatically reduced tariffs, Canada is positioning itself to be at the forefront of the global electric vehicle transition. These are affordable, high-tech vehicles that Canadians actually want and need as they look to reduce their carbon footprint and manage rising fuel costs. The American auto industry has been slow to adapt, expensive to purchase from, and frankly, out of touch with what the average global consumer wants. Chinese manufacturers, meanwhile, have been eating everyone's lunch on EVs, focusing on battery technology and affordability. Canada just decided to actually give its citizens access to quality, affordable electric vehicles instead of protecting a failing or stagnant American auto industry. This move forces competition and ensures that the infrastructure for the next century of transportation is built here, rather than being delayed by protectionist walls. Now, let us talk about what is happening in Washington, because the reaction there tells you everything you need to know about how badly this has backfired on American interests. Trump and his allies are absolutely panicking. They are scrambling because what they are realizing, probably too late, is that their bullying tactics do not work in a multipolar world. Canada called their bluff, and now they have to decide whether to inflict massive economic pain on their own citizens to follow through on a threat. Think about it from the American perspective for a second. They have relied on economic dominance over Canada for so long that they forgot Canada has options. They forgot that Canada is a G7 nation with enormous natural resources, a highly educated workforce, and the unique ability to forge partnerships with other major economies like China, India, and the European Union. When Trump threatened that 100% tariff, he thought he was wielding a big stick that would bring Ottawa to its knees. What he actually did was demonstrate to every Canadian voter and business leader why they need to reduce dependence on the United States. He made Carney's case for him and handed the Prime Minister the perfect political justification for pivoting to China. Now, American businesses are the ones facing the most dire consequences. If the U.S. actually follows through on those tariff threats, American consumers will lose access to Canadian lumber, Canadian energy, Canadian agricultural products, and Canadian automotive parts. Supply chains that have been integrated for decades would be disrupted overnight. Costs for housing, heating, and food in the United States would skyrocket. And for what? To punish Canada for daring to have an independent trade policy? It is an exercise in self-harm that many in the American business community are now desperately trying to stop. Let us be clear about something else that is happening here. China is winning this exchange big time, and they are doing it with a level of diplomatic finesse that Washington currently lacks. Beijing did not have to threaten anyone to get this deal done. They did not have to bully Canada or issue ultimatums. They just had to offer a fair deal, one that recognized Canada as an equal partner rather than as a subordinate or a junior partner in a continental bloc. In doing so, they have driven a significant wedge between the United States and one of its closest historical and security allies. When China said this trade deal does not target any third parties, they were being diplomatic and following the rules of international engagement. But everyone knows what is really happening. China gets increased access to the Canadian market, a critical foothold in North America for its burgeoning electric vehicle industry, and gets to demonstrate to other middle powers that there is a viable alternative to American economic domination. This is strategic genius on Beijing's part. They did not have to fire a shot or launch a trade war. They just had to be reasonable while the United States was being unreasonable. They had to offer partnership while America offered threats. Other countries are watching this unfold with great interest. They are watching Canada successfully diversify away from the United States, despite intense pressure. They are watching American pressure tactics fail to produce the desired compliance. They are watching China position itself as a reliable, reasonable trade partner that respects national sovereignty. The implications of this extend far beyond the borders of Canada and far beyond the specific trade in electric vehicles and canola. There is something even deeper going on here that often gets lost in all the trade statistics and tariff percentages. This is about the very concept of sovereignty in the 21st century. This is about Canada asserting its right to make its own economic decisions without needing a green light from Washington. For too long, there has been an unspoken assumption that Canada needs to clear its major policy decisions with the United States, that Canadian governments need to consider American interests first and Canadian interests second to maintain the peace. That is not a true partnership. That is a form of subordination. What Mark Carney is doing is saying that Canada is a sovereign nation that will make decisions based on what is best for Canadians. Full stop. If that aligns with American interests, that is a positive outcome. If it does not, that is simply the reality of being an independent country. You can see how threatening this is to the American establishment and the America First doctrine. Because if Canada can successfully assert economic independence, what is stopping Mexico from doing the same? What is stopping other countries in Latin America, Europe, or Asia from looking for alternative poles of power? The entire framework of American economic dominance depends on other countries believing they do not have alternatives, that they are trapped in a single orbit. Canada is proving they do have alternatives, and that realization is terrifying to the policy hawks in Washington. Let me zoom in on the electric vehicle component for a minute, because this is where you really see the forward-thinking nature of what Canada is doing versus the backwards-looking panic of the American response. The future of transportation is undeniably electric. That is not a political statement or an ideological preference. It is the technological reality of the global market. Chinese manufacturers are currently leading the world in producing affordable, high-quality electric vehicles. Companies like BYD are making cars that consumers actually want at prices they can actually afford to pay. The American approach has been to throw up massive tariff walls to protect legacy auto manufacturers that have been slow to innovate, expensive to buy from, and frankly, are producing vehicles that cannot compete on the global stage without help. That protectionism might save a few thousand jobs in Detroit or Ohio in the short term, But in the long term, it just means American consumers pay more for inferior products, while the rest of the technological world moves on without them. Canada's approach is fundamentally different and more pragmatic. By dropping tariffs on Chinese EVs, they are saying, we want our citizens to have access to the best vehicles at the best prices. We want to accelerate our transition to a greener economy. They are refusing to sacrifice their environmental goals and their consumers' interests just to protect an American auto industry that has refused to innovate at the necessary pace. And here is the thing. This strategy is going to work. Canadian consumers are going to have access to affordable electric vehicles. Canada is going to meet its emissions targets faster than its neighbors. And the Canadian automotive market is going to become more competitive. This will eventually force all manufacturers, including American ones, to actually improve their products if they want to stay relevant in the Canadian market. Meanwhile, American consumers are going to keep paying inflated prices for vehicles that are increasingly obsolete globally. That is not Canada's problem. That is a problem of America's own making through its reliance on protectionism over innovation. The agriculture component of this deal also deserves more attention than it is currently getting, because this is where you see the immediate tangible benefits for everyday people. Canadian beef producers just got access back to the Chinese market after years of being locked out by political disputes. That is a massive victory for the cattle industry. China is a huge market, and Canadian ranchers produce some of the highest quality beef in the world. Being shut out of that market since 2021 has caused significant financial pain for family farms and processing facilities across the country. Now that market is open again because Canada negotiated a deal that serves its own national interests. The same applies to canola farmers, lobster fishermen in the east, and pea producers in the west. These are real people making a living who now have better access to a massive customer base. Reduced tariffs mean their products are more competitive, which leads to more sales and more economic stability for agricultural communities that have been struggling. The American response to this has been nothing but threats of more tariffs, which would only hurt these same farmers. When given the choice between American threats and Chinese opportunity, any rational actor is going to choose opportunity. Projecting forward, the implications of this deal extend far beyond 2026. Mark Carney's administration has set a very clear goal of dramatically increasing non-U.S. exports by 2035. That is less than a decade away, and it represents a total pivot in Canadian economic history. This China deal is the first major pillar of that strategy, but it will not be the last. Canada is already looking to pursue similar trade agreements with India, the European Union, and the nations of Southeast Asia. The strategy is to build a diversified portfolio of trade relationships so that no single country can ever again exert the kind of pressure the United States has historically wielded. As Canada succeeds in this diversification, the power dynamic between the two neighbors will fundamentally change. Suddenly, American threats of 100% tariffs will carry much less weight because Canada will have other places to sell its goods and other places to buy its supplies. The relationship will have to be more equal because Canada will finally have the leverage of other options. This is going to reshape North American politics and force American policymakers to treat Canada as a true partner rather than as a subordinate client state. If they do not adapt, they will find themselves increasingly isolated as Canada builds stronger, more respectful relationships elsewhere. Donald Trump's role in this cannot be understated because his aggressive rhetoric was the catalyst that made this all politically possible for Mark Carney. Trump thought he was being a tough negotiator by threatening Canada with economic destruction. What he actually did was push Canada away and unite the country behind the need for diversification. Every time Trump insults Canadian leaders or treats the country like a subordinate, he makes it easier for the Canadian government to sell the public on the necessity of these new deals. He turns a potentially controversial trade policy into a matter of common sense and national pride. The tragedy for American interests is that Trump and his advisors do not seem to understand that in the modern global economy, countries have options and threats often backfire. This China deal is a direct result of that miscalculation. Now, American businesses and consumers are going to have to live with the consequences of a world where Canada is no longer a guaranteed, compliant market. This is a lesson in the failure of economic coercion in the 21st century. For decades, the United States has used economic pressure as its primary foreign policy tool, and for a while it worked because there were no other players on the field. But the world has changed. China has risen, regional trade blocs have formed, and countries have learned to diversify. Canada's successful pivot to China in defiance of American threats is a case study of this new reality. It demonstrates that middle-power countries can successfully resist coercion if they have the political will to develop alternatives. Other countries are learning from this example. They see that economic sovereignty is achievable. This has profound implications for how the United States will have to conduct its foreign policy going forward. The old toolkit is broken, and American policymakers are going to have to learn how to lead through partnership and innovation rather than through domination. Mark Carney understands this, and he is choosing the pragmatic path that serves Canadian interests and environmental goals. The era of Canadian economic subordination is coming to a close. This is Canada saying enough is enough. This is Canada choosing its own path, asserting its sovereignty, and ultimately, this is Canada winning its independence on the global stage.